Rocky came into my life a year after my dad passed away. I was in a dark place, feeling like I was drifting through the days without purpose. And then, one day at a shelter, there he was, a big, goofy German Shepherd mix with a lopsided ear and the friendliest face I'd ever seen. He wagged his tail like he'd been waiting just for me, and from that day on, he became my shadow. We were inseparable, and I truly believe he helped me find joy again. Now at 13, he's slower, his muzzle all gray, but he's still Rocky, still my boy. Or at least he was, until a few weeks ago. It started with him limping and struggling to stand up, then losing his appetite, which was so unlike him. My heart sank, and I knew something was wrong. After a series of tests, the vet confirmed it. Rocky had bone cancer. She laid out the options gently. We could consider amputation and chemotherapy. It's possible that treatment could give him more time, but at his age, it won't be easy. She hesitated, then added, and there's no guarantee he'll even make it through the surgery. I felt dizzy, like the world had just tilted on its axis. My instinct was to fight, to do anything and everything to keep him here with me. But my wife, Jen, looked over at Rocky with a pained expression, her hand resting on his head as he lay there, oblivious to the life-altering decision hovering above him. Later that night, she sat me down, her eyes red from crying. "I know you love him," she said softly, "but maybe we need to think about what's best for him, not us." I shook my head, unable to believe what she was suggesting. "Jen, he's been there for me through everything. I can't just give up on him now. I have to try." She nodded, understanding, but there was a sadness in her eyes that didn't go away. "I don't want to lose him either, Sam. I love him too. But the surgery, chemo, what if it's too much? He's already in so much pain. I just don't want his last days to be filled with confusion and fear." Her words stung, but I knew they came from a place of love. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that giving up now would be a betrayal. Rocky had pulled me out of the worst time in my life. Didn't I owe it to him to try and do the same? For days, we were caught in this quiet standoff, each of us trying to understand the other. I dove into research, reading every story I could find of dogs who'd survived amputation and chemo, clinging to any sign of hope. I showed Jen videos of happy three-legged dogs, telling her that Rocky could bounce back too. But she'd just nod, her face full of concern, and say, "Maybe, but we don't know if he'll be one of the lucky ones." Finally, after another night of tense silence, Jen suggested we talk to the vet again, together. "I just want us to really understand what he'd be going through," she said gently. "So we're making this choice for him, not for ourselves." The next day, we sat down with the vet, who patiently explained every part of the process. "It's a tough journey," she said. "Even if the surgery goes well, he'll have to adapt to life on three legs, and chemo can take a toll on older dogs. Some handle it beautifully, but others it's harder for them to enjoy their time." When we got home, Jen and I sat quietly in the living room, each lost in thought. Finally, she broke the silence. "Sam, he's always been the strongest dog I've ever met. But maybe strength for him means letting him rest now. He's given you so much. Maybe the kindest thing we can do for him is give him peace." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. But that night, as I lay on the floor next to Rocky, stroking his fur and listening to his soft breathing, I started to feel the weight of her words settle over me. He was tired, more than I'd let myself admit. His eyes were still full of love and trust, but they were tired too. The next morning, I watched him struggle to get up, his legs shaky, his breathing labored. He looked at me with those trusting eyes, as if he was waiting for me to tell him what to do. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't ask him to keep fighting just because I wasn't ready to let him go. I turned to Jen, my throat tight. I think it's time." She wrapped her arms around me, and we cried together, holding on to each other as the reality sank in. We spent Rocky's last days giving him all the love we could, letting him eat all his favorite treats, taking him to the park to lie in the sun, letting him sleep on our bed each night, even if it meant we barely got any sleep. He was so peaceful, so content, and it gave me a bittersweet comfort. On the day we said goodbye, the vet came to our home, and I held Rocky close, whispering to him that he was the best dog, that he'd save me in ways I couldn't even explain. Jen was there beside me, her hand on my shoulder as we let him go. He slipped away quietly, his body finally at rest, his suffering over. But the silence afterward was crushing. Every day since, I've felt his absence like a physical ache. I keep expecting to see him, to hear his paws on the floor, to feel him curled up beside me. I know, deep down, that letting him go was the right thing to do, that he's at peace, free from pain. But there's still a part of me that wonders if I gave up too soon, if I should have fought harder, for his sake and for mine. So I'm here, asking AITA for letting him go instead of fighting until the very end. My younger brother, Jake, and I have always been close. He's 6 years younger than me, and I've always felt this big brother responsibility to look out for him. Growing up, he was the quiet kid, the type to get lost in books or spend hours drawing in his room. He's incredibly talented, especially in art, and I always knew he was destined for something creative. A few years ago, Jake landed a job as a graphic designer at a small agency. It wasn't glamorous, but he was excited to be working in his field and earning enough to pay his own bills. He put his heart into that job, and every time we talked, he'd tell me about his projects and the new skills he was learning. It felt like he was finally coming into his own. But about 6 months ago, Jake told me that he was thinking of quitting his job to go freelance. I could tell he was nervous, but excited about the idea. He said he wanted more control over his work, that he was tired of being underpaid and overworked by the agency. He'd been saving up and felt he was ready to make the leap. Part of me was proud of him for taking a risk, but another part of me was worried. Freelancing can be tough, especially when you're just starting out. I've seen people struggle for months, sometimes years, to get a stable client base, and I didn't want Jake to end up stressed, broke, and burned out. At first, I just listened, letting him vent about all the reasons he wanted to quit. I could tell he was looking for validation, someone to tell him he was making the right choice. And part of me wanted to give him that, to be the supportive brother who backed him no matter what. But I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that he wasn't fully prepared for what he was getting into. So, after listening to him talk about his plans for a while, I finally spoke up. Jake, I think it's awesome that you want to go freelance. I started trying to keep my tone gentle. But have you thought about how hard it might be to get consistent work? It's a huge leap, and I just don't want you to get in over your head. His expression changed, and I could tell he wasn't expecting me to question his decision. I've been thinking about this for months, he replied, sounding defensive. I've saved up, I've done my research, and I know it won't be easy. But I'm tired of working for someone else and getting nowhere. I get that, and I don't blame you, I said, feeling a bit torn. But maybe it would help to build up some clients on the side before you quit. That way, you'd have a base to work with instead of starting from scratch. He sighed, crossing his arms. You don't think I can handle it, do you? No, Jake, that's not what I'm saying, I replied quickly. I know you're talented and hardworking. I just want to make sure you're setting yourself up for success. You've worked so hard to get here, and I don't want to see you struggling. He shook his head, clearly frustrated. You know, I thought you'd understand. I thought you'd be proud of me for wanting to take a risk for once, but it sounds like you think I'm going to fail. My heart sank. Jake, that's not it at all. I am proud of you. I just want you to be ready for what's ahead. Freelancing can be unpredictable, and I don't want you to be blindsided by how tough it can be to get steady work. He looked away, his jaw tight. I've done my homework, all right? I'm not some kid who doesn't know what he's getting into. I've saved, I've planned, and I'm willing to work hard for this. I thought you'd get it, but maybe you just don't have that kind of faith in me. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to tell him that it wasn't about faith, that I believed in him more than anyone. But I could see that he'd already made up his mind, and anything I said would only make him feel worse. So I nodded, swallowing back my own frustration. All right, Jake, if this is what you want, then I'm here for you. He left shortly after that, and I could feel the tension hanging in the air. We didn't talk much over the next few weeks, and every time I thought about calling him, I worried that I'd only make things worse. I hated that I'd somehow made him feel like I didn't believe in him, when all I wanted was to protect him from the difficulties I knew he'd face. A couple of months later, I found out through our mom that Jake had taken the leap and quit his job. He didn't tell me directly, and I couldn't help but feel a pang of hurt over that. I wanted to reach out, to tell him I was proud of him and that I was rooting for him, but something held me back. I felt like my doubts had driven a wedge between us, and I didn't want to come across as insincere or patronizing. Over the following weeks, I kept up with his progress through social media. He was posting about his new freelance projects, sharing his work, and it seemed like he was doing well. I felt relieved, but part of me also felt left out, like he didn't want me to be part of this new chapter of his life. Then a few weeks ago, he called me out of the blue. His voice sounded tired, defeated. He told me he was struggling to find consistent clients and that he'd underestimated how hard it would be to stand out in such a competitive field. He admitted he was burning through his savings faster than he'd anticipated and wasn't sure how much longer he could keep it up. I listened as he vented, feeling a mix of empathy and sadness. Part of me wanted to remind him of our conversation, to say, "This is exactly what I was worried about." But I kept my mouth shut, knowing that wasn't what he needed to hear. After a while, he sighed. I thought I could make it work, but maybe I was just fooling myself. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "Jake, you're not a failure for struggling. Freelancing is hard for everyone, especially at the start. But maybe this is just a chance to reevaluate and figure out what's next. You could always keep freelancing on the side while you build back up." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I guess I didn't realize how much work it would be to get steady clients. I wanted to prove that I could make something of myself without being stuck in some agency job." "You've got nothing to prove, Jake," I said softly. "You're already talented and hardworking. It's just about finding the right balance for you." He thanked me, and by the end of the call, he seemed a bit more grounded, a bit less defeated. But I still felt the sting of knowing that my initial honesty had hurt him. I wondered if I'd been too blunt, if I'd planted seeds of doubt when he needed someone to believe in him. I'd wanted to protect him, but maybe all I'd done was make him feel like he couldn't count on me. Since then, we've been talking more, and he started looking at agency jobs again while freelancing on the side. But there's a part of me that still feels guilty, like maybe I'd pushed him to doubt himself before he even got started. So now I'm left wondering, AITA? My friend Laura and I have been talking about doing a weekend beach bonfire party for ages. Every summer, it was the same thing. We'd make grand plans and then somehow never get around to actually making them happen. This year, though, we were determined. We talked it up to our friends, promised the best night of the summer, and even joked about how it'd be our legendary bonfire. We figured we'd set the bar so high that we couldn't back out without disappointing everyone. We split up the planning. Laura would handle the beach permits, the setup, and the drinks, while I'd handle the food, the firewood, and some sort of entertainment. We agreed to go all out with bonfire vibes and music, maybe even some mores and blankets for people to lounge around on. I pictured a cozy scene, everyone sharing stories and toasting marshmallows under the stars. It felt like the perfect plan, but of course life got busy. Laura's work got hectic, and I had family stuff going on, so neither of us were on top of it. Every time it came up, we both brushed it off, saying, "It'll come together. It's just a bonfire." A couple of times I asked her if she'd booked the permit, and she just waved me off with a yeah, I got it. I took that as confirmation and figured she had everything on her end covered. Meanwhile, I wasn't exactly going above and beyond myself. Instead of prepping some epic snacks like I'd originally planned, I told myself that chips, beer, and marshmallows would be enough. I'd also ordered a small batch of firewood, but nothing close to what we'd need for an all-night beach bonfire. The night of the party, I show up at the beach, juggling bags of chips, a couple of six-packs, a few skewers, and maybe a dozen pieces of firewood. I scanned the beach, looking for our designated bonfire area, but all I saw was Laura, sitting on a blanket with a cooler beside her, and nothing else. No wood, no setup, and no legendary vibe whatsoever. I walked over, trying to keep calm. Laura, where's the bonfire setup?" She looked at me, wide-eyed. "Wait, I thought you were bringing the firewood and the mores stuff?" I frowned, holding up my tiny batch of logs. "Yeah, I brought some wood, but this is barely enough for an hour. And I thought you were handling the permit and the setup." She blinked, then looked away, clearly embarrassed. I didn't actually get the permit. I thought we could just find a spot and keep it low-key." I felt my stomach drop. "Laura, are you serious? They don't let you just set up a fire anywhere here." She shrugged, looking defensive. "Well, I thought you'd look into it if it was such a big deal." "And chips?" That's all the food you brought. My annoyance flared. Well, I didn't want to go all out if we didn't even have a legal fire pit. Plus, you were supposed to handle the drinks, and all I see is a single cooler. Her eyes narrowed. Oh, so now this is my fault? I was busy with work. You could have reminded me, or double-checked. Isn't that part of being co-hosts? I was ready to respond when our friends started showing up, laughing and chatting as they strolled down the beach. The disappointment on their faces was immediate when they saw our pathetic setup, if you could even call it that. A few of them tried to keep it light, saying things like, "Oh, keeping it casual, huh?" Or "Wow, low-key vibes," but the whole thing was just sad. We didn't have enough wood for a real fire, so I tried to make a tiny, pitiful little flame that barely lasted half an hour. The kicker? Some random beach security guys came by to let us know that we couldn't have a fire there without a permit. We had to put it out almost immediately, and the half-burned wood was a total waste. People were polite enough not to say anything, but I could see a few of them glancing at their phones, probably looking for other plans. By 9 o'clock, most of the group had bailed, and it was just Laura and me left sitting on the sand with our half-empty bags of chips and sad cooler. I finally broke the silence, looking straight at her. I can't believe this is what our epic bonfire turned into. You said you had the permit. She sighed, crossing her arms. You know what? Maybe if you'd actually planned the food and firewood, this would have been a decent night. My jaw dropped. Excuse me? This is just as much your fault as mine. You didn't do anything to make this happen either. She rolled her eyes. Maybe if you'd actually been willing to communicate, instead of assuming I'd handle everything, we wouldn't be sitting here with nothing. The worst part was that I knew, deep down, she was partly right. I'd assumed she'd handle it all, and I'd definitely slacked off on my end. But I couldn't admit that. Not with her acting like this was entirely my fault. We ended up just sitting there in total silence, neither of us willing to apologize, both of us annoyed and disappointed. We didn't say much as we packed up and went our separate ways. And now I keep replaying the night, wondering if I was the one who ruined it. AITA? Alright, so here's the situation. My boyfriend, Matt, and I are preparing to move in together for the first time, which is something we've both wanted for ages. I should be thrilled, and I am, but we're quickly finding out that we have very different ideas about what moving in together actually looks like. I'm the type of person who plans everything down to the last detail. Like, I've already got a color-coded checklist, a folder with moving company quotes, and a packing timeline that'll have us all set by moving day without a hitch. Matt, though, he thinks that's all overkill. His whole vibe is, we'll get to it when we get to it, and he says that as long as we have boxes and a few days off, we'll be fine. To me, get to it when we get to it sounds like a recipe for disaster. But every time I bring up something like booking the movers early or scheduling when we'll pack each room, he just waves me off and says, we've got time. He genuinely believes we can throw this whole move together at the last minute, and that if we stress too much about the details, we'll just ruin the experience. So, a few weeks ago, I sat him down with my checklist and tried to explain why planning in advance is so important. I told him that if we book things early, there's less chance of something going wrong. We'll know what's happening when, and we won't have to scramble around at the last second. He looked at me, shook his head, and smiled. You know, I think you're making this into a way bigger deal than it needs to be, he said. It's just a move, not a military operation. I tried to laugh it off, but inside I felt my frustration bubbling up. But it's a big move. If we don't organize everything now, we're just inviting chaos. He shrugged, clearly not buying it. I just don't see the point of stressing over every detail. Moving's gonna be hectic no matter what. We might as well take it easy and figure things out as we go. It was like we were speaking different languages. To me, his laid-back approach was basically inviting disaster. While he clearly thought my planning was just a way to make things unnecessarily complicated. We went back and forth, but neither of us was really budging. So I thought, fine, maybe we could split the tasks. I offered to handle all the logistics, booking the movers, setting up the utility transfers, figuring out our packing timeline. He could handle the fun stuff like figuring out our decor, arranging the furniture, and picking out some new pieces for the place. I thought this was a fair compromise, but when I suggested it, he just looked at me and shook his head. I don't want to just be in charge of fun stuff, he said, crossing his arms. I want us to go through this together. I just think you're putting way too much pressure on it. At this point, I was torn between rolling my eyes and screaming into a pillow. I'm not trying to put pressure on it, I just want things to go smoothly, I argued. If we don't set things up now, what happens when moving day rolls around and nothing's ready? He just smiled like he had all the answers. Then we figure it out together. What's the worst that could happen? I honestly didn't know how to respond to that without sounding like a complete control freak, because the worst-case scenarios were exactly what I was trying to avoid. I pictured us scrambling to find last-minute movers, spending an entire weekend packing because we hadn't started early, or getting to our new place and realizing we hadn't set up utilities yet. It's like he couldn't understand that my planning wasn't about sucking the fun out of it. It was about making sure we didn't end up in a nightmare scenario. A few days later, things finally hit a breaking point. I'd found a really good deal on a moving company, and I told him that if we booked now, we'd save a ton. I was feeling pretty pleased with myself, figuring he'd see that my planning was actually saving us money. But he just looked at me, visibly frustrated. "Why do we need to book this far in advance?" he asked. "I don't get why you're rushing everything. We're not moving for another month." I tried to keep my cool, but I could feel my patience slipping. Because, Matt, if we wait, we could end up paying twice as much for a last-minute booking, or worse, end up with no one to move us at all. He rolled his eyes, which he rarely does, but he was obviously fed up. Or we could just rent a truck ourselves and take our time with it. We don't have to plan everything down to the second. We both went quiet for a moment, just looking at each other, both of us completely sure we were right. Finally, he let out a deep sigh. "Look, I know you want everything to be perfect, but moving's never perfect. It's supposed to be a little messy. I just don't want this whole thing to turn into a huge chore, you know?" I could tell he was trying to be understanding, but it was still hard to hear. It felt like he thought all my planning was some quirky personality flaw instead of a reasonable way to make sure this move didn't end in disaster. He wanted spontaneity, and I wanted security, and we just couldn't seem to find a middle ground. Since then, we've been trying to meet in the middle. He agreed to let me handle some things early, like packing up items we don't use often and starting to sort through our belongings. In exchange, I promised not to overplan the actual moving day, whatever that means. I'm still worried that without a solid plan, we're going to end up overwhelmed, but I can tell he's just as frustrated with me constantly bringing up the logistics. I even overheard him muttering, "She's planning the fun out of everything," under his breath the other day, which I'll admit kind of stung. I know he's just trying to help me relax and enjoy this new step, but every time I try to go with his flow, I can't shake the feeling that it'll all blow up in our faces if we don't prepare. I want to be excited, too, but I just can't let go of the details. And he clearly thinks I'm overthinking everything, like I'm turning something simple into a problem where there doesn't need to be one. So, now I'm left wondering, am I actually making this harder than it needs to be? Or is he being too relaxed for something this big? I'm genuinely stuck here, wanting to trust him, but feeling like I'd be an idiot not to prepare. AITA? Alright, here's the story of how a small loan to my friend Emma has turned into this unending, awkward drama. A few months back, Emma called me, super stressed and practically in tears, saying her car had broken down and she didn't have enough to cover the repairs. She needed $600 to get back on the road, and without it, she'd have a hard time getting to work. I didn't think twice. I sent her the money right then and there, and she promised to pay me back within a couple of months. Emma was grateful at first, thanking me over and over. I was just happy to help her out of a tight spot. But as weeks turned into months, I started noticing that every time I gently reminded her about the money, she'd get a little more evasive. She'd say, "Oh, I haven't forgotten. It's just been a tough month," or "I'm working on it. I'll get it to you soon." Meanwhile, I'd see her posting on social media about her shopping hauls, new skincare products, and nights out. I kept giving her the benefit of the doubt, telling myself she'd eventually pay me back. But by the time 3 months had gone by with no sign of repayment, I started to get uncomfortable. I texted her, saying something like, "Hey, I totally get that things are tight, but any chance you could start paying me back a little at a time?" She responded with a long message about how she was still struggling, but appreciated my patience. She even threw in a thank you for understanding, which almost made me feel like I was being unreasonable just for asking. Fast forward another month, and our friend group had planned a big night out to celebrate a friend's promotion. Emma was the first to order drinks, waving the server over and saying, First round's on me. She even ordered herself this $18 artisanal cocktail with some kind of edible gold leaf in it. I try to keep my cool, but by this point I was simmering. After her third cocktail, I decided to ask. Quietly, privately, I leaned over and said, "Hey, any chance you thought about paying back that loan? I could really use it right now." She looked at me, eyes wide, like I'd just slapped her. She replied in this incredulous voice, "Are you seriously bringing that up right now? We're all here to have a good time, and you want to talk about money?" I was floored. I'd brought it up as discreetly as I could, and she was acting like I'd ruined her entire night. She went on, muttering, "I can't believe you'd corner me like this. I thought we were friends." I tried to explain that I didn't mean to make her uncomfortable, but that it had been months and I really needed the money. She shook her head and said something like, "Honestly, if I knew you'd stress about it this much, I wouldn't have asked you in the first place." The rest of the night was unbearably awkward. Emma avoided me like the plague, and our friends started shooting me these confused looks. After the night ended, she sent me this long text about how disappointed she was that I'd choose a night out to harass her over a loan, and that real friends don't prioritize money over friendship. She said she'd get me the money when she could, but that my lack of trust had really hurt her. Since then, things have been tense. She barely talks to me, and when we're together with friends, there's this unspoken wall between us. Some of our mutual friends have even hinted that maybe I was a little too aggressive by bringing it up on a night out, saying it probably embarrassed her. But no one else seems to get that it's been months, and I've seen no effort from her to pay me back. Now I'm stuck feeling like the bad guy for even asking, and I don't know if I should have just kept quiet a bit longer, or if she's just taking advantage of my patience. I never thought a fake cockroach would ruin my friendship, but here we are. My best friend, Jamie, has a deep, deep fear of bugs. I mean, he can't even look at a ladybug without getting squeamish. So one day, after seeing him freak out over a tiny spider in the kitchen, I thought it'd be funny to mess with him. Nothing major, just a single fake cockroach placed carefully on his pillow. I even went with a smaller one, figuring it would give him a tiny scare. He'd laugh it off, and we'd move on. That night, I waited in my room, stifling giggles, and finally, I heard the yell, "What the?" followed by a loud thump. He launched himself halfway across his room and was now staring at the fake roach with a mix of horror and annoyance. I couldn't hold back anymore and started cracking up. He just glared at me, picked it up with a tissue, and muttered, "Not cool, man. Not cool." But he wasn't laughing, and honestly, I felt a little bad. I apologized, but he just grumbled something about getting me back. I figured that was just a threat until the next morning. When I opened my laptop to start work, I found that every single one of my keyboard keys had been rearranged. Jamie had painstakingly popped each key off and replaced them all in random spots. It was chaos. Letters, numbers, symbols all mixed up. I tried typing, but it was hopeless. I ended up spending half an hour fixing it. Jamie just smirked and said, I should have just let it go, but I couldn't resist getting him back. So the next night, I swapped out his body wash for some super concentrated fish oil. It was totally clear, just like his usual soap, and I figured he'd wash it off right away once he smelled it. The next morning, I heard him cursing in the shower, and when he came out, he smelled like he'd spent the night in a fishing boat. He wasn't amused, but I was laughing so hard I could barely stand up. "Are you serious right now?" he shouted, sniffing his arm. "Dude, this isn't funny," but I thought it was hilarious. He had to shower 3 more times to get rid of the smell, but I figured that was the end of it. Apparently, he didn't. The next night, I came back to our apartment after a long day, ready to just chill. I went to grab my water bottle from the fridge, took a big swig, and immediately spat it out. It was salty, like ocean-level salty. He'd added salt to all my drinks, my water, my soda, even the juice I'd saved from last weekend. Every single drink in the fridge was sabotaged. It was petty, but it pushed me over the edge. If he wanted to play dirty, I'd give him dirty. So I did a little research and learned how to create a harmless but smelly prank, stink bombs made of vinegar and baking soda, which would release a terrible smell when activated. I hid one in his gym bag and another in his shoes. I figured it'd give him a gross whiff, and that would be that. Well, that plan backfired spectacularly. He He found the stink bombs and, in retaliation, decided to go after my prized possession, my gaming console. When I went to play that night, I found my controllers completely wrapped in saran wrap. I tried unwrapping them, but they were layered so tightly it took me 20 minutes just to get one free. Jamie was in the doorway, arms crossed, looking smug. "You done yet?" he asked. "Oh, I'm just getting started," I shot back. From that point on, it was a full-on prank war. I filled his toothpaste tube with mayonnaise. He replaced the sugar in the sugar jar with salt. I put confetti in his ceiling fan, so it exploded when he turned it on. He put flour in my hairdryer, so I got a face full of white powder the next morning. It went on and on, each prank more irritating and elaborate than the last. Then came the grand finale. One Saturday, Jamie went out for groceries, and I decided it was time to end this with a bang. I took every single thing in his room, his bed, his dresser, his clothes, his books, even his trash can, and relocated it all to the living room. By the time I was done, his room was empty, and the living room looked like a furniture store. I left a little note on his door that said, "Welcome to your new room," and waited for him to come back. When he walked in and saw what I'd done, his face went from shock to horror to anger in about 5 seconds. He didn't laugh. He didn't even try to joke about it. He just gave me a cold look and said, "You're cleaning this up?" I expected him to crack a smile, but he was dead serious. "Are you kidding? This was funny." I protested. He didn't respond, just started picking things up and moving them back, ignoring me the whole time. The prank war had been fun, but now, watching him silently haul his stuff back to his room, I felt like I'd crossed a line. I tried to apologize, but he just waved me off, saying, "Forget it." He barely spoke to me for the next couple of days. The apartment felt tense and awkward, and I realized that what had started as a harmless prank had snowballed into something ugly. I thought back to that first fake cockroach and wondered if maybe I'd misjudged just how much he hated bugs. Now, things are back to normal, but there's definitely a weird vibe between us. Every time I bring up anything remotely funny, he just gives me this forced smile, like he's still waiting for another prank. I can't shake the feeling that maybe I went too far, but then again, he played his part too. So, this one starts with my best friend, Mark. We've been close since college, almost like brothers, really. We've been through each other's highs and lows, job changes, breakups, all of it. But recently, I started noticing little things. Mark backing out of plans last minute, not answering messages, just generally being off the radar. At first, I thought maybe he was going through something he didn't want to talk about, so I didn't push. But as weeks went by, I couldn't ignore the sense that something was seriously wrong. Then, last Saturday, we were supposed to meet up at our favorite bar, just like old times. But he texted me an hour before, saying he had something come up. I could tell he was dodging me. Frustrated and worried, I decided to swing by his apartment the next day, just to check in on him. When I got there, he seemed surprised but let me in. His place was a mess, half-empty takeout containers, dishes piled up in the sink. The lights were dim, and there was this heavy silence between us. He looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. I tried to keep things light, chatting about random stuff, but I could see he was distracted, his gaze drifting off. Eventually, I just came out with it. "Mark, man, are you all right? You've been acting kind of distant lately. And, no offense, but your place looks like a disaster. Is everything okay?" He tensed up immediately. "What? Are you here to judge my housekeeping now?" He tried to laugh it off, but I could see he was defensive. "No, not at all," I said, holding up my hands. "I'm just worried about you. You don't seem like yourself lately, and I thought maybe you could use someone to talk to." He sighed and looked away. After a moment, he muttered, "It's just been a rough few months, okay? Money's been tight, and I've been trying to make ends meet." They're happy. It hit me hard hearing him admit it, and I wanted nothing more than to help. "Mark, if you're struggling, let me help out. I'd be happy to lend you a little cash or cover some of your bills for a bit. It's no big deal." That's when he turned on me, his expression darkening. "No big deal," he repeated, his voice rising. "You think I need you swooping in to fix my life? Just because I'm having a rough patch doesn't mean I need a handout." I was taken aback, struggling to explain. "It's not like that, Mark. I just don't want you to feel alone in this. You've helped me through plenty of hard times. I just thought I could be there for you too." But he shook his head, his jaw clenched tight. "Well, maybe I don't want help. Maybe I don't want you treating me like some kind of charity case. I've been dealing with my life just fine without someone pitying me." His words stung, and I felt a rush of frustration and hurt. I thought I was being a good friend, offering support because he mattered to me. But instead, it seemed like my concern had only made things worse. Like he saw my offer as some kind of judgment on his ability to take care of himself. After an awkward silence, I managed to say, "All right, I get it. I didn't mean to overstep. I just thought I could be there for you." He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Thanks, but I don't need anyone stepping in. I'll figure it out." The conversation felt like it had a brick wall in the middle of it. I left his place feeling worse than when I'd arrived, questioning every word I'd said, every choice I'd made in even coming over. I thought he'd be relieved, maybe even grateful, but instead, I'd ended up making him feel judged or small. On the drive home, I kept turning it over in my head, wondering where I went wrong. Was I out of line for trying to help? Should I have just let him be, even if it meant watching him struggle? I only wanted to be the friend he'd always been to me, but now I'm left feeling like I did more harm than good. It's been months since the dinner, and I keep thinking I'll wake up one day and this whole thing will feel like a distant memory. But instead, it's like a stone in my shoe, a small, constant ache that reminds me how easily I brushed off Danny's big moment. I thought I'd put it behind me, but there's this lingering unease I can't shake, like maybe this wasn't just about one dinner, but something bigger I've refused to acknowledge. I keep telling myself that this was all a simple misunderstanding. I didn't see the importance of it. I didn't think he'd care that much. It's easy to say that and feel justified. After all, I had my reasons, didn't I? Work obligations, the drive, the general feeling that maybe all this fuss was unnecessary. But if I'm really honest, it wasn't about any of those things. It was about me not wanting to be inconvenienced, not wanting to prioritize someone else's moment over my own sense of what was important. And now, looking back, I think there's another truth I don't want to admit. That maybe I've gotten used to keeping people at a distance, to protecting myself from ever feeling too vulnerable, too invested. Maybe that's why I assumed Danny would understand, that he wouldn't take my absence personally. Because in my mind, everything had a kind of detachment to it. Relationships were fluid, easy, non-demanding. I liked it that way, but I didn't realize that real relationships, the kind that actually matter, need you to show up, even when it's inconvenient, even when you don't fully understand the other person's reasons. That dinner was his way of saying, "This is important to me. Can you be here to celebrate this part of my life?" And instead of recognizing that, I gave him what I thought he needed, a text, a thumbs up, a congrats, tossed his way, assuming it would all be good enough. It's weird though. Even now, when I think about reaching out to him, something in me hesitates. Part of me still feels this sting of pride, like I shouldn't have to apologize for not attending every little event. I keep trying to convince myself that he's blowing this out of proportion, that this was just one night in a lifetime of bigger, more meaningful moments. But every time I try to downplay it, that image comes back to me. Danny, looking around the room that night, searching for a face that never showed up. I can't escape this thought that maybe it wasn't about this dinner or this accomplishment. Maybe it was about the unspoken expectation that family, especially the people who've been there for each other, will be there for those small moments that end up meaning the most. And in missing that, I miss something much bigger than a celebration. I missed a chance to say, "I see you. I value what you're doing. I'm proud of you." I keep wondering if maybe I'm so caught up in my own sense of what's important that I've become blind to what matters to others. The worst part is I don't know how to bridge that gap. Every time I think about texting him, about apologizing, I feel like the words won't be enough. I can't go back and sit at that table. And no matter how many times I tell him, "I'm sorry," it won't change the fact that I missed out on a moment he'd hoped I'd share with him. The hardest part to accept is that maybe he won't see me the same way again. That, to him, I'll always be the one who couldn't be bothered to show up when it mattered. I thought I'd always be the cousin he could lean on, the one who would just get it without needing everything spelled out. But now I see that he needed me to understand without him having to say anything, and I failed to be there for him in a way that really counted. So here I am, stuck wondering if I can fix this, or if I'm just going to have to live with the consequences of my own indifference. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself for this, and part of me doesn't think I should. This guilt. It's here to remind me of what I did, to make sure I don't keep living like this, floating on my own terms without considering the impact of my absence. I can't help but wonder if this is how people drift apart. Not because of big betrayals, but because of small moments where someone decides that showing up just isn't worth the effort. Maybe this is how you end up a stranger to the people who used to know you best. So, this is about my dad's birthday, which turned into way more drama than I expected. My dad turned 60 this year, and my mom wanted to throw this huge surprise party for him. I'm talking venue rental, catered food, custom decorations. She went all out. She had this whole plan where everyone would pitch in to make it the most special day ever. And as usual, my mom was the ringleader, assigning roles to everyone in the family without really asking if we had time or wanted to help in that specific way. For her, family means all in, no questions asked. She's the kind of person who genuinely believes that if you're not doing exactly what she asks, you don't care about the family. She wanted me to be in charge of handling all the RSVPs, arranging transportation for some out-of-town relatives, and coordinating the playlist for the night. The RSVP part alone was a lot, but I didn't want to argue with her, so I agreed at first. But after a week or two of managing everyone's responses and dealing with some relatives who kept changing their plans, I was already burned out. I've been pulling extra hours at work, and juggling all the planning was going to be way more than I could handle. And honestly, I felt like it was a bit much to expect me to manage everything when she was the one who wanted to go all out. So, 2 weeks before the party, I told her I could help with some things, but I couldn't keep up with everything she wanted. I said I'd come to the party, make sure Dad knew how much I appreciated him, but I couldn't be the coordinator for the whole event. She gave me this look like I just told her I didn't care about Dad's birthday at all. She went on about how much this day meant to him, how hard he'd worked for the family, and how it was the least I could do to step up and take on some responsibilities. In the end, I stuck to my guns. I told her I'd still be there, bring a gift, and help set up a little on the day, but I wasn't going to handle all the RSVPs and transportation. She was not happy, but she said fine and took over the planning herself. I thought we moved on. Fast forward to the day of the party. I showed up on time, gift in hand, and ready to celebrate. My dad was thrilled to see everyone, and it looked like things were going well. But the second I walked into the kitchen to say hi to my mom, she barely looked at me. When I asked if everything was okay, she just said, "Oh, wouldn't you like to know?" I brushed it off, figuring she was just stressed, and went to join the party. But then my aunt approached me, saying something like, "So, we heard you couldn't be bothered to help with any of this." I laughed, thinking she was joking, but her expression was dead serious. I asked what she meant, and she just said, "It's okay. Not everyone cares about family as much." By now, I was feeling completely blindsided. One by one, I noticed relatives giving me these disappointed looks, some muttering comments about showing up only when it's convenient and barely lifting a finger. At this point, I was getting mad. I'd taken time off work to be there. I'd brought a gift, and I'd been more than willing to celebrate with everyone. But apparently, because I hadn't handled all the RSVPs or arranged transportation, I was now the villain of the party. Even my dad, who's usually chill, seemed disappointed when he thanked everyone who had gone out of their way to make his day special, looking directly at me when he said, "I know some people had more important things to do." After a couple of hours of tense vibes, I ended up leaving early, feeling embarrassed and frustrated. I texted my mom afterward, asking why she'd let everyone think I'd abandoned them when I'd made it clear I couldn't do all the tasks she'd assigned. She just replied, "Well, we all have to make sacrifices for family, but I guess not everyone can manage that." It felt like a slap in the face. She'd created this massive event, expected me to carry half the planning, and now she was making me the bad guy because I hadn't stepped up the way she wanted. It's been a few weeks, and I'm still getting cold responses from my family. Even in the family group chat, there's this obvious frostiness whenever I try to join the conversation. My mom keeps making little digs, like posting pictures from the party with captions about those who put in the effort, and my dad barely answers my calls. I don't know if I could have done more, or if I should have just sucked it up and handled all the planning to keep the peace, but I can't help feeling like this isn't fair. A couple of months ago, I got a call from my childhood friend Mia. We hadn't spoken in years, but she told me she was going through a tough time. She'd left a toxic relationship, moved out of her place, and had been crashing on couches for weeks. She was thinking about a new start in my city and wanted to know if she could stay with me just for a few weeks while she found a job and an apartment. I remembered her as funny, easygoing, and honestly, in need of a bit of luck. So I said yes. I had a spare room, and I thought I could help her get back on her feet. To make her feel welcome, I set up the guest room with fresh sheets and towels, bought some groceries, and even stocked up on a few things I knew she liked. She showed up looking exhausted but hopeful, and thanked me over and over, saying how this was going to be the fresh start she needed. I thought, all right, I'm doing a good thing here. The first week was nice. She'd go out each day, supposedly to look for jobs or apartments, and we'd catch up in the evenings. She was chatty and optimistic, telling me about interviews and leads she had. It was kind of nice having someone around, and I was glad I could help her turn things around. By the second week, though, things started to feel off. Mia was still going out, but now she'd come back with shopping bags, talking about treating herself to get her mojo back before job hunting seriously. She'd even say things like, "Gotta look the part before I get the part, right?" Meanwhile, she was eating through the groceries faster than I could stock them. When I tried suggesting that maybe she could start with a smaller, temporary job just to get some cash flow, she brushed it off, saying she was waiting for the right thing and didn't want to get stuck in some dead-end job. The mess started soon after. Dishes left in the sink, crumbs everywhere, makeup and hair products all over the bathroom. I'd ask her to help tidy up, and she'd laugh it off, saying, "Oh, I know I'm such a mess. I'll get to it," but she didn't. Piles of her clothes appeared on the living room couch, and she'd leave takeout boxes on the coffee table for days. I started to feel like a maid in my own home. By week 3, Mia was spending her entire day lounging in pajamas, watching TV, or scrolling through her phone. When I'd come home from work, she'd be exactly where I'd left her in the morning, sprawled on the couch, watching her latest Netflix binge with snacks and empty cups everywhere. She wasn't even pretending to job hunt anymore. I'd tried dropping hints about apartments or jobs I'd found for her, but she'd wave it off, saying, "Ugh, I can't deal with that right now. I just need to recharge." Then, she started having friends over without asking. I'd come home to find people I'd never met before in my living room, eating my food and hanging out like it was their place. When I finally confronted her about it, she acted genuinely surprised, saying, "I thought you were fine with this. I mean, you've always been so chill." I reminded her that this was my home and asked her to check with me before bringing people over. She shrugged and said, "I just didn't think it would be a big deal. I guess I misjudged how uptight you are now." The tipping point came when she took my car without asking. I had a long shift the next day, so when I found my keys missing, I panicked. She came back hours later, acting like it was nothing. When I asked her to at least tell me before taking my car, she got defensive, saying, "Oh my God, chill out. I had to run some errands. What's the big deal?" The big deal was she'd used half the tank and left the car a mess, which she brushed off with, "It's just gas. You make good money. You'll be fine." At this point, I'd had enough. I sat her down and explained that I'd expected her to make more progress, that it was supposed to be a temporary stay. I suggested a timeline for her to find other arrangements, maybe a month tops, and gently pushed her to start contributing for groceries and other expenses. She looked at me, completely offended, and said, "Wow, I didn't realize my presence was such a burden. I thought you were helping me." I explained that I was happy to help, but I needed her to show some effort, and that living here indefinitely wasn't an option. She threw her hands up, saying, "You have no idea what it's like to be in my position. You've always had it so easy." She went on, telling me I was selfish and ungrateful, that a real friend would be more understanding. She accused me of rubbing my privilege in her face and making her feel like a burden. I was stunned. I'd opened my home, done everything to support her, and here she was acting like I was the villain for setting boundaries. Since that conversation, things have been tense. Mia's still here, barely speaking to me and leaving snide comments around like, "I guess some people just care about money more than friendship," or "It must be nice to be so lucky." Meanwhile, she's still eating my food, using my car without asking, and taking over my space as if it's hers. I'm at my wit's end. I wanted to help her, but now I feel completely taken advantage of. Part of me wonders if I should have been more patient or if I was too harsh, but another part feels like she's just using me. My best friend, Claire, had been talking nonstop about how stressful her job had become. Every time we hung out, it was like she was carrying a heavier load. She's a nurse, working insane hours, and dealing with patients and doctors who constantly push her limits. I could see it was wearing her down. She used to be so bubbly and full of energy, but lately she seemed drained, barely even laughing at things that would normally crack her up. So, when her birthday was coming up, I thought, this is my chance to give her a break. I planned a weekend away for her at this peaceful cabin I found by a lake, the perfect place for her to recharge. I told her boss and her mom, who I knew would be up for helping, about the plan, and they agreed to help clear her schedule. I figured I'd pick her up, drive her there, and let her have the weekend to herself. No phone, no work, just nature and relaxation. I put my whole heart into it, booking everything, packing snacks, and even grabbing some books I knew she'd been meaning to read but hadn't had time for. I couldn't wait to see her reaction. I thought she'd be thrilled that I'd taken care of every little detail, allowing her to just be for a few days. So, on the day, I showed up at her place, all excited, telling her to pack a bag because we were leaving in an hour. She just stared at me, looking completely thrown off. "Wait, leaving? For the weekend?" she asked, confusion all over her face. "Yeah," I said, practically bouncing. "I planned this whole getaway for you, a chance to unwind. I took care of everything. You don't even have to think. Just pack a bag and relax." But instead of looking grateful or excited, she looked uncomfortable. "You planned all of this without telling me?" she said slowly. I nodded, still convinced that she just needed a minute to process it. "Yeah, I wanted it to be a surprise. You've been so stressed, Claire, and I thought this would be the perfect way for you to unwind without worrying about anything." She crossed her arms and took a deep breath. "But I had my weekend all planned out already. I was going to catch up on errands, see my mom, and finally get some stuff done around the house. And now you're just taking me away without asking?" The excitement I'd felt started to drain. "I thought you'd be excited. You've been working nonstop, and I figured you'd appreciate the break. I wanted you to have a weekend for yourself, to just breathe." She shook her head, looking a bit hurt. "I get that, but that's just it. You assumed you knew what I needed. I actually had plans this weekend. I'm behind on everything because of my hours, and as nice as the idea sounds, I don't have the luxury of dropping everything." I could feel my face getting hot, embarrassed and a little hurt. "Claire, I'm just trying to help. I've watched you burn yourself out, and I thought this would be good for you. I cleared it with your boss and even your mom. They all thought it would be a great idea." That seemed to make things worse. "Wait, you talked to my boss and my mom?" she said, her voice tight. "You went to everyone else but me? You organized this entire thing around my life without even asking how I'd feel about it." I was stunned. In my head, this had been the ultimate gesture of friendship, something that would lift her spirits and make her feel cared for. "Claire, I didn't mean to overstep. I just wanted to give you something you'd never take for yourself." She looked at me, disappointment etched on her face. "I appreciate that you wanted to do something nice, but maybe next time just ask. Surprising me with a weekend away isn't helpful when it just feels like more pressure to do something I didn't plan for." I didn't know what to say. All I'd wanted was to make her feel seen and supported, to show her that someone cared about how hard she'd been working. I stood there, feeling foolish, wondering how something I'd thought would be the perfect gift could backfire so badly. In the end, I left, apologizing, but feeling crushed. I thought I was giving her something meaningful, and instead, she felt blindsided and stressed. Now she's been distant, and I'm wondering if I totally misread the situation. All right, here's the story of how my sister Jen's engagement party turned into one of the most confusing nights of my life. I thought I was just being a good sibling, but apparently everyone else thought I was doing something wrong. Jen and her fiancé, Luke, have been dating for about 2 years when he proposed, and she's been on cloud 9 ever since. She's always been the type to dream about her wedding since we were kids. Pinterest boards, bridal magazines, the whole 9 yards. She was clearly over the moon about being engaged, and of course, I was happy for her too. But honestly, I didn't think her engagement party needed to be a huge ordeal. I mean, they'd only been together a couple of years, and while I like Luke, he's not exactly this knight in shining armor type. He's more of a plays video games all weekend type, but if Jen's happy, then I'm happy. The party was at this cute little hall that Jen's best friend decorated to look like some Pinterest board exploded. Fairy lights, white tablecloths, and a wall of flowers for photos. People were oohing and aahing over the setup, and when Jen and Luke made their grand entrance, everyone cheered like they'd just won an award. We had drinks, snacks, and a whole table of desserts that probably cost as much as my monthly grocery bill. I wasn't trying to be a buzzkill, but all the hype just felt a little overblown, you know? Then came the toasts. A couple of our friends gave these heartfelt speeches about how perfect Jen and Luke are together and how this is what true love looks like. My mom even got a bit teary and talked about how she'd always dreamed of this moment for Jen. It was sweet, but I couldn't help but think about how many times we've seen Jen and Luke argue about stupid stuff like where to go for dinner or whose turn it is to take out the trash. I mean, every couple has their issues, right? So when it was my turn to say a few words, I tried to keep it real. I raised my glass and said, "Jen, I'm so happy for you and Luke. Marriage is a big deal, and it's not always easy. I know you two have had your ups and downs, but it's clear you love each other. Just remember to keep communicating. Love isn't always like in the movies, but if anyone can handle the reality, it's you two." I thought it was a balanced, honest toast. I didn't want to sugarcoat things because, let's be real, marriage is hard. But when I finished, there was this weird silence, and then a few people awkwardly clinked their glasses. Jen just kind of gave me this tight smile and moved on to the next toast. I thought it was fine, but then a bit later, one of Jen's friends pulled me aside and said, "That was kind of a downer toast. This is supposed to be a happy moment for them." I laughed it off and said, "Hey, I was just being honest. I'm sure they'll appreciate the advice when things get tough." But her friend just rolled her eyes and walked away, which I thought was kind of rude. I mean, don't people always say that marriage takes work? As the night went on, everyone kept gushing over the couple, asking about wedding plans, the venue, the colors, the whole thing. Jen was glowing, going on and on about this dreamy outdoor wedding she's planning, with all these flowers and a harpist and everything. It's definitely a big production, and all I could think about was the price tag. Jen's not exactly swimming in cash, and our parents are helping out, but I know they're worried about the cost too. So I asked her, "That sounds amazing, but have you thought about maybe scaling back a bit? Weddings are so expensive, and there are ways to make it beautiful without going all out." Jen looked at me like I'd just suggested eloping at the courthouse. She said, "I've been dreaming about this day forever. I want it to be perfect." I tried to laugh it off and said, "I get it, but a perfect day doesn't have to mean breaking the bank. It's the marriage that matters, not just one day." She kind of forced a smile and said, "Thanks for the advice, but I know what I want." I figured she just wasn't ready to talk finances, which is fair, but it seemed like solid advice. I mean, I'm just looking out for her. Then, toward the end of the night, a few of us were sitting around talking, and Jen's best friend started asking people about the best advice they'd give the couple. People were saying things like, never go to bed angry, and always put each other first. And when it came to me, I thought I'd be honest and real with her. So I said, don't forget to keep your independence. It's easy to get caught up in each other, but keeping your own interests and friends is key to a happy marriage. You don't want to lose yourself, right? Well, Jen kind of laughed awkwardly and said, I don't think that'll be an issue. And one of her friends mumbled, way to keep it uplifting, under her breath, which got a few laughs. I was a little annoyed at that point. I mean, just because it's not the typical advice doesn't make it any less valuable. So I told them, look, I'm just saying that marriage is about balance. I know a lot of people who've lost themselves in their relationships, and it's something worth keeping in mind. Jen sighed and said, thanks, but I don't think I'll need to worry about that with Luke. She didn't sound angry, but she definitely seemed like she'd had enough advice for the night. So I just nodded and kept quiet for the rest of the evening, figuring maybe everyone was just a little too tipsy or emotional to appreciate my point. The next morning, though, Jen called me and said, look, I know you were trying to be supportive, but it kind of felt like you were, I don't know, poking holes in everything last night. It was my engagement party. Couldn't you just let me be excited? I tried to explain. I am excited for you, Jen. I just wanted to share some real advice that could actually help you in the long run. But she sighed and said, maybe save the real talk for another time. Last night was supposed to be a celebration, and it felt like you kept reminding me how hard marriage is going to be. That frustrated me, because I honestly thought I was being helpful. I mean, everyone else was filling her head with all these fairy tale ideas, and I just wanted to give her a balanced view. Marriage is a big commitment, and it's not like I said anything mean, I just offered realistic advice. I told her, I get that it was your night, but I wasn't going to sit there and act like marriage is all sunshine and rainbows when it's not. I want you to be prepared. That's all. She sighed and said, maybe just keep it to yourself next time. Then she hung up, and now I'm wondering if I really did something wrong. So, AITA for giving her some honest advice instead of just playing along with the fairy tale? All right, here goes. My boyfriend, Daniel, and I have been planning to go to his family's annual beach house weekend for the past couple of months. It's this tradition his family has, and I was really excited about it. I've met his family before, but this was the first time I'd be spending a few days with them in close quarters, and I wanted to make a good impression. Now, here's the thing. I'm not really a sit-around and relax person. I love activities, and for me, a beach trip means kayaking, paddle boarding, maybe some beach volleyball, and going out for seafood. I've been looking up all kinds of fun things we could do around the area, and even made a list. When I shared my ideas with Daniel a few days before the trip, he just smiled and said, sounds fun, but my family likes to keep it low-key. We mostly just hang out at the house, maybe take a walk on the beach. They're not big on planned activities. I was a bit surprised, but I thought maybe he was just underestimating how fun it could be to have a few activities lined up. So I said, sure, but I'm sure they wouldn't mind doing a couple of these things, right? It could be nice to mix things up. He just gave me a shrug and said, we'll see, which I took as a sure go ahead. Fast forward to the trip. We get there, and his family is incredibly nice and welcoming. They've got this gorgeous beach house, and everyone's settled into this super chill vibe. They're lounging on the deck with books, sipping coffee, chatting, basically the opposite of the jam-packed adventure weekend I pictured. On the first full day, I suggested we go paddle boarding since there was a rental place nearby and the weather was perfect. Daniel gave me a look but didn't say anything, so I brought it up with his family, saying it could be a fun way to spend the morning. His mom kind of laughed and said, oh, honey, we're more the beach chair and magazine types, but you two should go if you want. Daniel gave me this sheepish smile and said, yeah, go ahead, we can check it out. So, we went paddle boarding, but I could tell he wasn't totally into it. I asked if he was okay, and he just said, I'm fine. I just didn't want to leave everyone behind. That threw me, because it's not like his family had explicitly said they didn't want to do anything, right? I thought they just needed a little nudge. The next day, I suggested a group volleyball game, thinking it could be a fun, easy way to get everyone involved. But when I brought it up, his dad laughed and said, wow, you're ambitious. We're usually happy, just relaxing. But you and Daniel can go ahead. Daniel shot me a look that I couldn't quite read, and I started to feel like maybe I was pushing too hard. But at this point, I'd already put so much effort into planning stuff that I didn't want to just abandon the whole idea. After the volleyball suggestion kind of fizzled out, I asked Daniel if he wanted to go on a short hike with me, just the two of us, to a lookout point nearby. He sighed and finally said, look, I get that you're used to keeping busy, but my family really likes to just relax on these trips. Can we maybe just do that? That's when I got a little defensive. I just thought it would be nice to make the most of it. We're at the beach, not just sitting around at home. I thought you want to do things together. He gave me a look I hadn't seen before, part frustration, part sadness. I do want to spend time with you. But part of that, for me, is just being here, relaxing with everyone. Not everything has to be an activity or an event. I felt embarrassed and a little hurt because from my perspective, I was just trying to make the weekend fun and memorable. So, I kind of withdrew for the rest of the afternoon, not really sure how to handle it. But later that evening, when everyone was sitting around on the deck watching the sunset, his mom turned to me and said, I hope you're not bored with our lazy little weekend. Daniel said you're more of an adventure seeker, and I hope this isn't too tame for you. I laughed it off and said I was having a great time, but I noticed Daniel was watching me with this look of relief. Like he was worried I'd tell his family the truth, that I'd been expecting something different, and maybe wasn't entirely enjoying the slower pace. The next day, I tried to just roll with it. I left the activity list alone, tried to match their vibe, and even settled in with a book. But internally, I was restless, like I was wasting a beach trip by not actually doing anything. Daniel seemed happier, though, so I kept my feelings to myself. The whole drive home, there was this underlying tension. I finally said, Look, I didn't mean to push. I just thought maybe we could blend our styles a bit. He sighed and said, I get it, but this is kind of a sacred tradition for my family. I wanted you to experience it the way they do. I just wish you'd trusted me when I said we should keep it simple. And now I'm torn because I feel like I was just trying to make the weekend fun and show his family a good time. But maybe I was pushing my own idea of a great beach trip onto them instead of reading the room. So now I'm left wondering if I should have just gone with the flow or if it was fair to bring my own excitement to the trip. When my dad told me he was passing down the family business, I thought it was a hypothetical, some distant future I wouldn't have to worry about for years. But a few weeks ago, he sat me down, looked me square in the eye, and said he was retiring at the end of the year. The business, a hardware store my grandfather started decades ago, would be mine if I wanted it. Only I didn't want it, not even a little. Growing up, the store had been my dad's whole life. He poured everything into it, missing birthdays, school events, even family holidays just to keep it running. I respected the hell out of his dedication, but I also knew that I wanted something different. I'd gone to college, gotten a degree in marketing, and was building a career in a big city, far from the small town where I'd spent my entire life up until then. I was happy here, with friends, opportunities, and a life I'd fought hard to create. The idea of dropping all that to run a hardware store was the last thing I wanted. When I told my dad, though, his reaction was worse than I expected. So, that's it, he asked, staring at me stunned. You're just going to let everything your grandfather and I built disappear? I winced, feeling guilt twist in my stomach. Dad, it's not like that. It's not my dream. I appreciate everything you've done, and I love you for it. But the store was never what I wanted for my life. He looked down, his shoulders slumping. Your grandfather built that place with his bare hands. I put everything I had into it. I thought this would be something we'd pass down, something you'd keep in the family. I know, and I respect that, but I can't do it, Dad. It's not who I am. I've got a career here, a life I've worked for. I thought you'd understand that. His face hardened, and I could see the hurt in his eyes. Understand? I thought family meant more to you than that, Jake. I thought you want to honor what we've built, that you'd care about our legacy. I took a deep breath, tried to keep my voice steady. Dad, family does mean everything to me. But the store, it's not my passion, and I don't want to run it half-heartedly. That wouldn't do anyone any good, especially not you or Grandpa. He shook his head, looking down at his hands. I always pictured you taking over. You're my son, Jake. I thought you'd step up when the time came. The silence that followed was thick with tension. I could feel his disappointment, his hurt. I knew he felt like I was abandoning him, but I couldn't pretend to be someone I wasn't. I loved my family, but I also knew that I couldn't give up everything I'd built for myself. Isn't there someone else who could take it on? I asked softly, hoping I wasn't twisting the knife further. Maybe one of your managers, or you could sell it. He looked up, his eyes cold and almost unrecognizable. Sell it? You think I'd sell our family's history, just like that, to a stranger? I swallowed, struggling to find the right words. Dad, I'm not saying it's an easy choice. I can't do this. Not without giving up everything I've built. You raised me to be my own person, to find my own path. This is it for me. This is where I feel at home. He sat there for a long moment, staring at a spot on the table, his face etched with disappointment and anger. I don't think you understand what you're giving up, he said finally, his voice low. You think you know better than your old man? Think your fancy job in the city is better than what I have to offer? No, it's not about that. I insisted, feeling a mixture of frustration and sadness. It's just, I want something different. I'm not cut out for the store. I'd only end up resenting it. And that's not fair to you or to Grandpa's legacy. Legacy, he muttered, shaking his head. You talk about it like it's some burden, like we're trying to trap you. I thought you'd see it as an honor. I felt my chest tighten, struggling to explain something that seemed so clear to me and so impossible for him to understand. It's not a burden, Dad. It's just not me. I've spent years working toward this career, toward this life. You can't expect me to just walk away from that. He stared at me for a long time, his expression unreadable. Finally, he leaned back, letting out a sigh that sounded like a mixture of defeat and heartbreak. I thought you'd be different, Jake. I thought you'd care more about where you came from, about the people who made you who you are. I guess I was wrong. The words hit like a punch. I could feel the weight of his disappointment, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. And while part of me wanted to apologize, to give in, I also knew that doing so would mean giving up a part of myself, the part I'd fought so hard to build. "Dad," I said quietly, my voice thick with emotion, "I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you wanted, but I need you to understand, this isn't my dream. It's yours, and it's an incredible dream. I'm proud of you, of everything you and Grandpa built, but I have to live my own life." He shook his head, looking down at the table. "You're making a mistake, Jake. You're turning your back on your family, on everything we've done for you. I don't know how you can live with that." The guilt twisted in my stomach, and I knew this was a rift that might never fully heal. But I also knew that staying out of guilt or obligation would only make things worse in the long run. We sat there in silence for a long time, both of us lost in our own thoughts, our own pain. I could feel the distance growing between us, the weight of expectations that neither of us could bridge. And as much as I wished there were an easy answer, a compromise that would make us both happy, I knew that wasn't going to happen. "I'll always love you, Dad," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "And I'll always be proud of what you've built. But I have to live my life the way you taught me to." He didn't respond, just stared at a spot on the table, his face hard, his jaw clenched. And as I left that day, the heaviness of our last conversation sat with me, the knowledge that I'd let him down in a way that words couldn't fix. Now, here I am, back in the city, trying to move forward, but I can't shake the feeling that I've broken something I can't repair. I wonder if I should have tried harder, if I should have found some way to make it work. But deep down, I also know that staying would have meant giving up a piece of myself, a piece I'm not willing to lose. So, I'm the designated organizer in my friend group. I'm the one who makes reservations, sets up game nights, remembers birthdays, all of that. This year, I volunteered to plan our annual New Year's Eve celebration. It's a big deal for us. We've done it together every year since college. And it's always been a low-key night at someone's house with a bunch of snacks, board games, a cheesy countdown on TV, and drinks. Real casual and low stress. But this year, I thought we could shake things up. We're all a few years out of college now. Everyone's doing pretty well, so I figured, why not go big? I kept thinking how awesome it'd be to really celebrate, like put on fancy clothes, do something special, have a night worth remembering. So I took the initiative. I rented us a suite at this really swanky downtown hotel with a view of the skyline, booked a table at a nearby rooftop bar, and even arranged for a limo to pick us up and take us around for the night. I thought it'd be a cool surprise, something way more glamorous than the usual couch and pizza affair. I'd been stashing away some extra cash for a while, and I was willing to cover part of the costs so everyone could afford it. I figured it'd be a night to remember, right? A week before New Year's, I sent out a message to the group chat. Surprise! This year we're doing something a little different. Get ready for a night on the town. I attached some photos of the hotel suite and the rooftop bar, expecting everyone to be pumped. But instead, the chat went silent. Then my friend Kayla messaged, "Wait, what happened to just hanging out at my place like we talked about?" Another friend, Jason, replied, "Yeah, we've always done New Year's that way. I wasn't planning on spending a bunch of money or dressing up. I thought we were keeping it simple." I was a little thrown. I thought they'd be excited, maybe even grateful for a break from the usual routine. So I explained, "Look, I just wanted to make it more memorable this year. We've done the same thing every year, so I figured we could try something a little fancier. Plus, I already booked everything. Just show up and enjoy it." But Kayla sounded frustrated. "I kind of like our usual New Year's. It's chill, low-key, and we can all just relax and talk. This sounds like a whole production. I was planning on spending the night in PJs, not buying a new outfit and paying for a fancy bar." Jason added, "Yeah, and that sounds like way more money than I planned for. I thought we were doing snacks and drinks at Kayla's, not renting a suite and going out to clubs." I told them I'd cover a big part of the cost, and that they wouldn't have to worry about anything other than showing up. "Trust me, guys, I've got it all handled. Just bring your best outfits and get ready to have an amazing time." But they didn't look convinced. The day finally came, and I met them in the hotel lobby with this huge smile, excited to show them the suite and the view. But they all just kind of shuffled in, looking a little uncomfortable. They had dressed up, but it was obvious they'd thrown things together last minute. Kayla even muttered, "I feel weird. This isn't really my scene." At the bar, I kept trying to pump everyone up, getting rounds of drinks and suggesting fun photos. But they all looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Instead of relaxing, everyone was sitting stiffly, sipping their drinks with forced smiles. Jason pulled me aside at one point and said, "I don't get it. This is all nice and everything, but it doesn't feel like our New Year's. It's like you planned this for strangers, not us." I tried to explain. I just wanted us to have something different, a real night out for once. I mean, we always just do the same thing. I thought this would be a fun change. But he shook his head. "We like what we usually do. Just hanging out, being ourselves. This feels like a party for someone else, not us." By the time we got back to the suite for the countdown, the vibe was awkward. I'd brought champagne, thinking we'd toast at midnight, but when I popped the bottle and tried to get everyone excited, they just looked tired and out of place. Midnight hit, and the countdown felt weirdly anticlimactic. We all toasted, but the energy was flat. No one was laughing or making silly resolutions or taking goofy photos like we usually do. After the countdown, everyone sort of lingered for a bit and then quietly said their goodbyes, heading out way earlier than I'd expected. The next morning, Kayla texted, "Thanks for organizing everything, but I really hope next year we go back to our usual tradition." Jason chimed in with a seconded. And now I'm left wondering if I totally missed the mark. I thought I was doing something exciting for everyone, something they'd love. I just wanted to make it feel special, but they acted like I'd forced them into some uptight event instead of a New Year's party. I still don't fully get it. We could do a quiet New Year's anytime. Isn't it fun to go all out once in a while? So, AITA for trying to elevate our New Year's party?